Okay. Well, I want to welcome you here, and I think we'll be having people log in as we go. But we're really excited about this meeting today, and you'll hear more about kind of this is our first Zoom meeting for Bivocational. Now, our Hispanic area has had a number of these and had really great response. And so I really appreciate Scott and Lastro helping us get this together. And we're very excited about our guest speaker today. And I think you'll have a great dialogue with him. His name is Brad Brisco. He is the director of the Bivocational Church Planting of the North American Mission Board. And he has studied in that area. His doctoral thesis is about moving churches toward a missional direction, and he has written several books. One we have used quite a bit called Missional Essentials, and you'll hear more about that later. He is married. They have 3 children, and they're also foster parents. And through the years, they have probably had about 50 different foster children that they have welcomed into their home different times. So it is really a great joy to that you are here joining with us, and we're excited about this meeting. And so we're going to begin with prayer, and I'm going to ask Brother Lastro Chapa to lead us in prayer, and then Brad will begin our session after that. So, Brother Lastro, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Let's join in prayer. And so we'll be enjoying this meeting together. I'm so glad that everybody's here, and or most of the people. So let's join all of us in prayer. Father, we are grateful for what you're doing in our lives and how you're teaching us. We want to follow you. We want to be obedient to your voice and listen to your spirit. Thank you for Brother Brad and what he is teaching us. And we pray, Lord, that your name will be glorified, and that also, Lord, that we will be listening to you. Help us, teach us, Lord, where we're willing to listen. Thank you so much for this time. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Amen. And Brother Brad, this is your turn.
Thanks, Lazaro, for that. So let me just tell you just a little bit more of my background, kind of piggyback on a little bit that Bob said there. So I've actually worked for the North American Mission Board now for over 20 years, which is hard to believe that it's been that long. But 17 of those years, I was a church planting catalyst, which just means I helped to recruit and train and resource and coach church planters. I did that for 5 years in Wichita, Kansas, and then for 12 years in Kansas City. And then 3 years ago, I took this new role, as Bob said, it's just called Director of Bivocational Church Planting. And then actually 1 year ago this week, in fact, I think 1 year ago today, I was driving the moving truck from Kansas City. We moved to the Tampa, St. Pete area of Florida. So we've been here 1 year. And what really the primary ministry reason, now I like warmer weather. I got tired of winters in Kansas City, and I do like the water. But the primary ministry reason we moved here is there's actually a church here called the Tampa Underground that over the last 6 or 7 years have become friends with a lot of the leaders there, and there's just nothing like it in the country. And we can come back and talk about this later if you want when we do Q&A, but it's what I would call a decentralized network of microchurches. So there are well over 100 microchurches throughout the city that are all kind of connected together in what's called the Tampa Underground. So that was really, if it wasn't for the underground, we wouldn't be living where we live. But so again, we can come back to that a little bit. So here's what I thought I'd do. Let me just take about, I don't know, maybe 12 to 15 minutes and share some things that I've been working on in this new role the last 3 years as Director of Bivocational Church Planting. And I think this will open up plenty of possible conversations or dialogue we can have around multiple issues. And then I'll just kind of leave it to you of where we go. So if you would just kind of make note of some questions or thoughts you have about what I'm about to share. So when I moved into this new role 3 years ago, I knew that one of the things I wanted to do was help to change what I would call the biased narrative around bivocational pastoring and especially bivocational church planting. And what I mean by that is I think that there's a lot of times if I do like a day of training, in person, I'll usually start with a question. I'll say, this is the question I'll ask. What do you think comes to the mind of most people in the church when they hear the word bivocational? So I'll say, look, if you're a leader, not what comes to your mind, but what do you think comes to the mind of most people in the church when they hear the word bivocational? Well, the sad reality is 99% of the time it's negative. It's like, oh, part-time, not fully on board, scattered, compartmentalized, church isn't big enough to pay him a full-time salary. It's just all kind of negative. And that's what I mean by the bias narrative. I've talked to dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of bivocational church planters, and they all kind of hear these little whispers that they're not legit. It's like, hey, when are you going to go to a church big enough to pay you a full-time salary? Or when's your church going to grow enough where they can pay you full-time? Well, I not only do I think that's wrong, I think it's unbiblical. So I was just convinced very early on, we've got to change that. We've got to change that kind of storyline or that bias narrative that for the most part is negative. I don't want it to be negative. I want it to be very positive. And so I think so 3 years ago, I kind of decided there were 2 or 3 ways that we could all be involved in changing that narrative. So that's what I want to share with you. I want to share with you kind of 3 things that I've focused on to try to change that bias narrative. So first is I think we need to champion the benefits of being bivocational. And I think there are lots and lots of beautiful and wonderful benefits. Now, I think there's more than this, but I'll usually frame all the benefits of being bivocational around 3 little phrases. The first phrase is missionary engagement. What I mean by that, and I just think you can't argue with this, I don't think, is that when you're a bivocational church planter, you have access to a mission field that a fully funded planter simply does not have. Now, I'm a big both and guy. I'm not an either or. I'm not saying one's better than the other, or, and there certainly isn't anything wrong with having a fully funded church planter or a fully funded pastor. Nothing wrong with that. But the reality is a bivocational planter that has a calling in the marketplace or a part-time job in the marketplace has connection to relationships there that they wouldn't have otherwise. So I've done dozens and dozens of interviews. I have a 9-question survey that over the last year, I've done lots of interviews, phone interviews with bivocational planters. And 2 of the questions of those 9 that I always ask is, what are the 2 greatest benefits and what are the 2 greatest challenges of being bivocational? And every single time, bar none, I mean, like every interview I've done, the number 1 benefit every single time is that access to a mission field. Now, they might frame it differently, but they just say, look, I have relational connections with people I wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, I get to talk to and connect with people relationally that never, ever, ever would come to my church. So I think we need to talk about that. We need to talk about in an increasing missionary context, when more and more people are less and less interested in the programs and activities of the church. As missionary-minded people, we have to find other places to connect with people relationally. And I think one of the best places to do that is in the marketplace. So a huge benefit of being bivocational is this missionary engagement piece. And another little nuanced part of that, of the missionary engagement, I would say, I actually think it also gives the bivocational church planter great street cred, or you could call it respectability, both inside the church and outside the church. So in other words, inside the church, again, I just don't think you can argue with this. People in the congregation, they appreciate that the church planter or the pastor can relate to what they go through Monday through Friday. And again, I'm not saying it's bad to be fully funded. There's nothing wrong with being a fully funded church leader. But there is a bit of a disconnect. If you've always been fully funded, and if your only kind of full-time gig has been, a full-time pastor in a church, there is just a bit of a disconnect between what people experience in the marketplace. So I've just discovered there's great respectability inside the church when people, they just appreciate, they know, hey, if you work 20, 30, 40 hours a week, in the marketplace, you can relate to the things that I go through. You can relate to the struggles that I have with time management that I have, all of that. But maybe even more important than that, the street cred inside the church is the street cred outside the church. So I just think, again, in what I call an increasing missionary context, I think it's very helpful when you are building relationships with people, if you can, oftentimes, if you can lead with your calling in the marketplace rather than saying, oh, well, what do you do? I'm a church planter. Now, maybe that's not a strange thing in Dallas. I mean, I bet in some circles in Dallas, it is a strange thing. But I'm telling you, if you go further north and also, any major city, which of course Dallas-Fort Worth is that, it's just an odd thing sometimes when someone says, well, what do you do? And you say, I'm a church planter. It's like, what is that? I mean, I have conversations all the time with lost people that, they have zero Christian background. I mean, I had a conversation, it's somewhat funny. I had a conversation several months ago with someone that they wanted to know, how do pastors get paid? They wondered if when you walk into a Sunday morning church service, when you put money in the plate, do they give that to the pastor after the service? I mean, it was like, in their mind, it was like a cover charge. That like when you go to church, you pay something that they give to the pastor. I mean, again, we just don't realize sometimes how little kind of church or Christian background lots of people have nowadays. So that's why I just think it gives you kind of respectability outside the church if you can lead by saying, oh, I'm an architect, or I'm a school teacher, or whatever it is, a bus driver. I don't care what it is. So all of that is just that missionary engagement piece. All right. I just think there's great benefits. And one of the ways we can frame the benefits is this missionary, or you call it missional engagement. The second benefit is what I just call financial stability. Now, under the financial stability piece, I think there's three different things to talk about here. One is, I think there's greater financial stability for the church planter. So when the primary support for the church planter is coming from the marketplace, I've just discovered there's less financial strain on the church planter and the church planter's family. So any of you that have planted churches before, as a church planter, you almost always have to have like multiple side gigs just to try to make ends meet. And it can be very, very stressful. I remember when I planted a church at one point, my wife jokingly would say I had 8 jobs because I had all these little jobs trying to make ends meet. Well, if your primary support's coming from the marketplace, and especially if that marketplace calling provides benefits like insurance and vacation and maybe some kind of retirement, there's just way less financial strain on the church planter's family. So financial stability for the church planter, financial stability for the church plant itself. So if the primary support's coming from the marketplace for the church planter, then obviously there's just going to be more finances available, more funding available for mission and ministry. And I can give you a great example of this. One of my favorite stories of a bivocational church planter, the guy, he's in the DC area. His name's James Hickson. He's actually a federal agent. He's a CIA federal agent. He planted a church 6 years ago, and he's never taken a penny from the church. And he told me, because he has such a great job in the marketplace, he said from day one, when they planted the church, they give 20% of their budget to church planting. And he told me, Brad, if the church would, if I had to have a salary from the church, he said, just the truth is we wouldn't give that much money to church planting. So it just frees up so many resources for mission and ministry. And then the third financial stability benefit is, so I would say the church planter, the church plant, and then I would say the church planting entity. So in our tribe, that could be a Baptist, that could be an association, it could be a state convention, it could be the North American Mission Board. The reality is we don't have enough money to plant all the churches that we need to plant. And the only way we're going to see a true church planting movement is to do it with bivocational church planters. So I think there's a huge benefit financially in all three of those fronts. So we need to talk about the benefits, missionary benefits, the financial benefits, and the third benefit I just called shared leadership. So, anytime we plant a church, regardless of what your strategy or your model is, I think we would all agree it's best to plant with a team. But when you plant as a bivocational church planter, it's a no-brainer. There's no other way. You can't work 30, 40, 50 hours a week in the marketplace and try to do everything yourself. Well, when we plant bivocationally, I just think we're forced to lean into shared leadership, lean into what I would call mutual leadership or roundtable leadership. And again, I'll give you an example with James, the CIA federal agent I was telling you about. Another one of his benefits, when I asked him what the 2 greatest benefits, the first one was the access to a mission field, but the second one was this, shared leadership. He said, Brad, listen, he said, I never have to ask for volunteers. He said, I never have to ask people in my church to step up. He said, because they know I work 50 or 60 hours a week. They just all know James can't do all of this. So we have to play our part. So it just forces everybody to get into the game, which of course is biblical anyway. So how are we going to change this biased narrative around Bivo planting? The first thing is we have to highlight or champion the benefits. The second thing I would say is we need to champion Bivo planters themselves. So I would say all of us, every one of us on this call, every opportunity we get to tell the story of a bivocational church planter or bivocational pastor, we need to do that. I would say we need to do it to be an encouragement to them, but we need to do it to crack open the imagination of other people. So all the time when I tell a story about a guy in New York who's a high school science teacher and he planted a church eight years ago, someone will go like, oh, I didn't know that was an option. I didn't know I could be a school teacher and plant a church. So we need to do it to kind of crack open the imagination of people in our churches to see that, no, they can actually have a calling in the marketplace and start something at the same time. So we need to highlight the benefits. We need to highlight the planters themselves. And then the third thing is I felt like we actually needed to, in some sense, change the language. So a couple of years ago, we actually, at the North American Mission Board, we started using this language of co-vocation. So let me explain the difference if you never heard that strange word, co-vocational, and hopefully by now you have. But here's why we started using that language. You know, I actually think the word bivocation can sometimes get in the way of what we want to see accomplished. So here's the way I'll describe it a lot of times. I'll say, have you ever heard the word bifurcate? To bifurcate means to take one thing and divide it into two parts. It's about compartmentalizing. Well, I think sometimes when we use the language of bivocational, that's what we do. We compartmentalize and we separate our calling in the marketplace and ministry. So that's actually called dualism. And the more common language a lot of times we use in Christian circles is a sacred secular divide. So somehow we think some things are sacred and other things are secular. And I think that's of the devil. That's not biblical and it's not helpful. If God reigns over all things, then in a sense, all things are sacred. So we need to help people realize, regardless of what God's called them to do in the marketplace, they can be in full-time ministry. And there aren't some callings that are more important than other callings. All work matters and all work is important. But what happens sometimes when we use the word bivocational is I think we have too many pastors and church planters that compartmentalize and they think in their heads, oh, I do my work over here so I can do ministry over here. Well, I want to help them realize work and ministry don't have to be two separate things because work is good. But also I want to help them think about how can I begin to align those two things together. So think about the word co-vocation. So C-O, it comes from the Latin prefix com, C-O-M, which means to have in common. So think of words like co-labor, co-author, co-pilot. They're about bringing two things together. So now let me say this. I still use both words. I still use bivocational and co-vocational. But here's the little nuance for me that I think is helpful. So for me, a bivocational church planter is someone that has a part-time job in the marketplace that they see as temporary. So in other words, their hope or their dream or their aspiration when they're planting a church is they have a part-time job over here, and their hope is the church eventually grows to the point to where they can leave their part-time job and focus full-time on the church. So that's really kind of like Acts 18. You know, the Apostle Paul was a tent maker. So we kind of, that historically, that's kind of what we would call that as a tent maker. I have a part-time job over here, but I hope someday I can focus full-time on the church. Well, I want to say, look, nothing wrong with that, right? It's all good. But for me, the reason I think we need this additional language of co-vocational is, for me, a co-vocational church planter is someone that has a job in the marketplace that they never intend to leave. They know God's called and wired them to be a business owner or an architect or an engineer or a school teacher or a mechanic. I don't care what it is, but they know God's called and wired me to do this, but I also feel like God's calling me to start something at the same time. Well, here's my hope. My hope is as we all champion the benefits of bivocational and we all champion bivocational planters themselves, that in a sense, we'll have more and more bivocational church planters in a sense become co-vocational church planters. So in other words, even when the church grows enough that they could leave their part-time job in the marketplace and go focus full-time on the church, they decide to stay. They're encouraged. They see the benefits missiologically and financially, and they see, no, it's actually a good thing for me to be in the marketplace, and I'm going to stay there. Well, there's still that biased narrative that's out there. I mean, but it is starting to change. I have conversations almost every single day with bivocational leaders that realize the benefits of it. And I just think it's super encouraging. Again, because we don't have enough money. I mean, that's a huge benefit. But again, for me, the biggest benefit is missiologically, that we can reach into, the nooks and crannies of all of our cities and our neighborhoods. One of the best ways we can do that is through the marketplace, through the way that God has called and wired us. Now, let me say just one or two other little things, and then let's just throw it open and talk about this. I think this is a conversation we have to have much earlier on. I would say in some settings, we need to have these conversations in youth group. We certainly need to have them in collegiate ministry settings. I mean, we need to help collegiate men and women understand that full-time ministry doesn't have to be Bible college and seminary. Now, I'm not down on seminary. I have 2 seminary degrees, but I just talk to too many young people that someone will say to them, look, if you're serious about ministry, then you need to go do this, when they think God's called them to be an architect or an engineer. I want to say, no, look, if you feel like God's called you to be an engineer, then please be the best engineer you can for the glory of God. But at the same time, you can start something. So one of the things that means is that we're going to have to rethink church planting. So part of this for me also is not just rethinking vocation, but we have to rethink church planting. And the way, kind of the bottom line for me in rethinking church planting is, here's the way I'll usually say it. As I'll say, we need to help church planters think less like a pastor starting a Sunday morning worship service and more like a missionary engaging a context. So we'll still get to the Sunday morning worship service because we are a gathered worshiping community, right? The church is. But I would just say in a missionary context, we shouldn't start with the Sunday morning worship service. That we need to start with missionary behaviors and activities, and we can get to the gathering. But unfortunately, in too many of our church planting circles, we start with the gathering and then try to engage in missionary behaviors. And I just think in an increasing missionary context, we need to flip that. We need to start with we need to think and act like a missionary, and then we can get to the Sunday morning worship service. So part of bivocational and co-vocational church planting is thinking a little bit differently about what church planting looks like. So that's probably enough to either make some of you mad, or maybe there's some follow-up questions, or is there enough there that you can ask some questions, or we can dialogue a little deeper on any of that?
Yeah, so if you guys have a question, you can either type it in the side, or right now it's conversational. Just unmute and ask something. Brad, you mentioned about, I see Brother Javier. Go ahead, Javier.
Well, and I like what you're saying, because I think we're thinking outside the box, where we have been involved too much inside the box. And one of the things that I would ask is, as we look ahead, and let's not look at just COVID-19 and what's going on right now, but as we look ahead and what we see here in America and across the board, is this where we're headed for, where you're going to see more bivocational pastors, co-vocational pastors? I noticed that I see David Tamez, Lacey Seminary. How about the Hispanic? Because in the Hispanic community, we tend to think a little different about how we see a pastor. And we still have that mentality that the pastor does everything. And they even go to the extent, and I've been told this, no, pastor, they look at you, they want you to, they want you. And these are leaders that are surrounding me that I'm expecting for them to get involved as well. And they have the tools to do that, but yet they won't make a move without the pastor. So if you can comment a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's a great observation on both fronts. So the first thing you brought up was is this the future? Well, I would say, Yeah, I mean, I would actually say it's not just the future; it's actually the present, or it needs to be. But also, I would say, in other cultures, I mean, certainly in the African American culture and in Hispanic culture, this isn't anything new, right? I mean, this is the way. I mean, most of my African American church planting friends, they've always been bivocational. It's just the way. I mean, and sometimes trivocational. They've got 3 jobs or 4 jobs. So we actually need to learn. I think. We actually need to learn from, what have they learned over the years? But I think one of the things is that, there still is too great, especially in the Hispanic community, there's still too great of what I would call a clergy laity divide. So earlier I talked about the sacred secular divide as relates to vocation. I think we have to diminish, and this isn't going to happen overnight because this is a deeply, deeply rooted assumption of this clergy laity divide. So let me go to that one then. So I do think we all have to, and it's not just in the Hispanic community, this is true for all of us. I do think there's some deeply held assumptions that we have to address. And sometimes I'll use the language of paradigm shifts, that I think there's some paradigm shifts for most of us that have to happen here if we've been church for a very long time. So I'll give you one little example or one little resource that you could access. So this last year, there's 2 ebooks that I wrote that are free downloadable ebooks. They're in both English and Spanish. So one of them is just a little 100-page ebook. It's called Rethink. And in that book, Rethink, it's subtitled 9 Paradigm Shifts for Activating the Church. And it's just a super simple, accessible ebook. And I mean, it's only 100 pages. So each of these 9 little chapters are only like 7 or 8 pages long. So it's really just a basic introduction to these different topics. But one of them deals a bit with the clergy laity divide. And I just think we just have to have these conversations in our churches. We need to help people understand we've got to blow up this clergy laity divide. It's not biblical. I mean, it's the body of Christ, right? That everybody has to play. Everybody, no one sits on the bench. And that actually fits into one of the lessons in this little ebook is on APEST. And I don't know if you're familiar. Some of you probably are, but APEST, A-P-E-S-T, comes to Ephesians chapter 4. It's about the giftings of the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. I think that's a very, very helpful framework to get people to get engaged more in God's mission and ministry, is to help them see how are they wired and how has God wired them to really participate in the body of Christ. So there's just a huge paradigm shift there around that clergy laity divide that I think we have to address. But then back to your first question about the future, I still think, I'm just going to be frank with you. I still think, at the North American Mission Board, we've done we have some amazing processes and systems as it relates to church planting. I mean, as it relates to orientation and training and coaching and care, it's world class. But still, the vast majority of what we provide for training and coaching is not for bivocational or co-vocational church planters. We still lean towards a fully funded kind of church planter. I think things like the COVID pandemic is going to force us to think a little differently about that. And some people might think that's a bad thing. I actually think it's a good thing. So I think yes, it is the future, and in a sense it's the present, but I actually think we're a little bit behind on that. I mean, I still think we still lean too much towards the fully funded church planter. But the day is coming, and it's coming rapidly, that we're going to be forced to think more and more about bivocational and co-vocational church planting. Does that make sense? I mean, is that fair? Oh, the other thing, let me just mention, I mentioned the Rethink ebook. The second resource is just called Co-Vocational Church Planting. And it's about where the ebook, the Rethink, is only about 100 pages. This is about 270 or 280 pages, but it's also in English and Spanish. So if you just Google Rethink ebook, and if you Google Co-Vocational Church Planting ebook, it'll take you to a landing page on the NAM website where you can download either one of those for free. And again, both English and Spanish. So the Rethink ebook is actually about 80% of that ebook is in the Covo book. But what I wanted to do in the Rethink ebook is I took almost all the church planting language out of it, because I wanted it to not only be a little kind of primer for church planters, but I wanted it to be a little resource for existing churches that are wanting to try to just, what does it look like to kind of get people in the church outside the walls of the church? I wanted this just to be a little resource that people could use to kind of get that conversation started.
Thanks, Brother Javier. You've been doing co-vocational for years, right? Yeah. Someone else, just unmute and ask us a question.
Okay, I think Anna has a question, but her computer is not working well, but she's here with me, so I'm going to take advantage of that.
Hi. I don't know, I'll try to do it in English. If not, somebody please help me with my English. But I think we are talking about two different things. One is the already established church, or people who have been in church for so many years doing the things in the same way, and a new focus on the church planting. So I am not sure if we need to change the mentality of people that have been there for a long time, used to do the things in the same way, or just free the people who want to start this new model.
Well, yeah, no, that's a fantastic comment. And I agree with you 100% that I think there are kind of two things here. I think we have to decide, there's two things there. There's one about starting new expressions of church, right? And then how can we go about that in a missionary context? So let's see, what is today? Saturday. On Thursday, let me tell you one other resource, because then you could access this other thing. So if you're interested in this whole rethinking church planting kind of conversation, a year ago, I started a Facebook group that is just called Co-Vocational Church Planting. So if you're on Facebook, if you just search Co-Vocational Church Planting, trust me, it's the only thing that will come up. But it's a group I started about a year ago, and I think now there's over 800 people that are in this group. Well, just this morning, I think it was this morning, I posted a video. I did a breakout session for the Canadian Sin Network gathering on Thursday, and the breakout that I did was called Empowering Smaller Expressions of Church. So I just posted the video of that breakout in the Covo Facebook group. So in that breakout, I just talk about how, we have to start new things, without a doubt. But as you just brought up, the other conversation is, what do we do with existing churches? So, existing churches that really do want to help to activate more of the people of God in the church into mission, that's a different conversation than it is. You just brought that up. That's a different conversation than how do you start something brand new. So when I work with existing churches, the language I'll usually use is incremental shifts. So I'll just talk about how can we help the people in the church begin to make incremental shifts to become more and more engaged in mission. So I think that's a different, as you brought up, that's a different process than starting something from scratch. And I think, all of us, we just kind of have to decide how's God wired me? Am I more kind of apostolic, pioneering? Do I like to start things? Or am I someone that, I'm a little more patient and I want to try to bring about, change in the existing system? So, I think those are two different, but I address that in this little breakout. I just kind of talk about what does it look like to transition existing small groups to become more outwardly focused, and how does that differ from starting something new from scratch? But I agree with you 100%. Those are actually two different conversations.
God, if there's a way that we can all get those resources in an email, I just downloaded the Rethink in Spanish, and it's really, really good. And I sent it to other people, and some of them were reading it, and they say that this is a really good resource.
Great.
So I'll tell you what, I think I've got a link to I do right here. Let me just drop this link to the video in Vimeo right here. And then you don't even have to, if you want to go through if you want to join the Covo group on Facebook, do that. But if not, here's the direct link to the Vimeo video that the North American Mission Board posted yesterday. So.
And we will, there is a chat going on off on the side. And after the meeting, honestly, it'll probably be Monday. We'll turn that into a short list of links and such, resources that we'll send to everybody that's on this call. So you can, you'll also get that, and with Brad's new link in there. Thanks, Brad. Someone else, just unmute and ask a question. Well, Brad, you've brought it up a couple of times while the other people, I'll give other people a chance, but let me mention, you talked about the importance of teamwork as a church planter, and especially how that's highlighted and just necessary if you're a bivocational or co-vocational church planter. And then you talked about APEST. So some of us may be familiar with that, but could you just kind of go over, because sometimes, you know,
Sure.
in Baptist life, apostle and prophet can set off heresy thoughts and such. So
Yeah.
could you just give us a short, obviously it's books, but if you could just give us a short look at the teamwork idea and APEST specifically.
Yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, I have a pretty strong bias towards the benefits of APEST. So let me give you just a little bit of background. And I know and I think there's some misconceptions. I mean, most of the time people that are like, man, I'm not sure if I like, or, you know, I'm comfortable with that. I think part of it is just there's some, you know, I like to actually address those objectives. So I actually have a little white paper I wrote. It's probably about 2 pages long that just kind of addresses any objections people might have to it. But here's the bottom line, I would say. So it's Ephesians chapter 4, where the Apostle Paul says that at Christ's ascension, he gave these gifts to the church, the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. Well, historically, we've interpreted that text as a leadership text. I would even say we've interpreted it as a clergy text. In other words, we've thought that that was about the gifts given to the leadership or the clergy to equip the saints for the work of ministry. I think that's a wrong interpretation. It's not a leadership text, it's a body text. In other words, those are gifts given to the body to equip the body for the work of ministry. So in other words, those are gifts given to everybody in the body, and it's an equipping text. So like if you're a teacher, you need to figure out how are you to equip other teachers. If you're gifted in evangelism, you need to equip other people to be gifted in evangelism. So it's a body text. Well, and also I think sometimes we don't like the language because I think some of that language has kind of gotten hijacked over the years by other groups. I mean, like apostle. Well, look, I never call someone an apostle, but I do think it's helpful to say someone is more apostolic. All that means is they're a pioneer. They like to start things. You know, in our current culture, it's like an entrepreneur. That's my highest thing is apostolic. I love to start things. And in fact, I didn't share this with you. I didn't become a believer until I was almost 30 years old. And I was in the restaurant business with my brother for 13 years. Well, when I became a Christian, I just knew God wanted to use this kind of entrepreneurial spirit in church planting. So it just made sense to me. And here's the thing also about it is it's really helpful to understand how you're wired. Because when I planted a church, I really struggled with being a pastor because everybody in our church plant expected me to like be the shepherd. And I'll just be frank with you, I don't have a shepherding bone in my body. I mean, I stink at being a shepherd. And I always struggled. I mean, I read everything about how to be a better pastor and be a better shepherd. And I just struggled with it. Well, it wasn't until I realized, and when I became aware of APEST, that I realized, wait, I'm much more apostolic. I'm the one that likes to go out front and start things. Well, that's when I realized I need shepherds on my team because I'm not the shepherd. Well, here's the point of the Ephesians 4 passage. If you don't get anything else, you got to get this. That passage says that until all 5 of those gifts are activated and being exercised, the church will not reach maturity. That's what Paul says. He actually says the church will not experience the fullness of Christ. Well, I would argue that the church coming out of really Constantine in the 4th century, that really the church is organized around and informed by only 2 of the 5 gifts, and it's the shepherd teacher. Now, this isn't about diminishing the shepherd teacher. It's about elevating the other 3. Because again, that passage says until all 5 of those gifts are being activated and utilized, the church will not reach maturity. Well, I think you could argue the church isn't mature because it's just all about the shepherd teacher. And the unfortunate thing over the last many, many years, the more apostolic, evangelistic, and prophetic people have actually left the church and started parachurch organizations, when those are actually ought to be things that the church should be involved in. Does that make sense? So I just think as a church planter, a lot of times, church planters will hear, oh, I need to have a team. But normally when we hear the word team, we think of ministry categories. So we think, well, I need a team. I need a worship leader. I need a children's person. I need a youth person. And you still might need ministry teams, but I think it's much more helpful if we think of APES teams. So in other words, I really encourage church planters to go through an assessment, figure out how they're wired, and then identify who's missing on your team. Because I think some of the best church planters are apostolic people. But if you're apostolic and if you're not a shepherd, you better make sure you have a shepherd on your team, or you're going to wear everybody out. But if you're a shepherd and you're planting a church, you better make sure you have an apostolic and evangelistic person on your team, or you're never going to start anything new. You're just going to focus on shepherding and caring for the flock, which that's good. But it's not good if that's the only thing you do. We need to have a fully functioning fivefold team. Does that make sense? Because all of those giftings operate best in conjunction with the other gifts. So I just tell church planters, find out how you're wired, who's missing on your team, bring on your team so you have a fivefold, fully functioning team, and then how are you going to listen really well to each other? So we're not missing anything, and the church can actually reach maturity. So I think APES is just a really helpful. And here's one other thing that I would say: if you still kind of struggle with those being individual callings or giftings, just think about them as functions of the church. Think about them as communal functions of the church, and ask questions like this: is the church to be a teaching community? Yeah, no brainer. Is a church to be an apostolic community? Yeah, we're supposed to start things. Is a church to be an evangelistic community? Is a church to be a shepherding community? See, they're functions of the church first and foremost, and then I think they're giftings. And then the one other thing that I would say that I think is a really helpful, if someone's not real sure about APES, is that Jesus was the archetype of all five of those gifts. Jesus was the perfect shepherd. Jesus was the rabbi teacher. Jesus was the sent one. He was the apostolic. Of course, he was a prophet. So, Jesus was all five of those gifts. And at the ascension, he gave those gifts to the body to continue the work of his work. Does that make sense? So all that to say, in that little Rethink ebook, one of the lessons is on APES. So it's just 7 or 8 pages. So it's just a simple introduction, but that might be a place, if that's something that's kind of new, that might be a place to start. Just kind of start you thinking about the whole APES conversation. So that was a long answer to a short question there, Scott.
Yeah, no, that was great. Brother Robert, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yes. As a church planter, there's goals, or, you're working with different groups. And there's, as a bivocational, there's pressure. I have the experience, been there, bivocational, full-time, part-time, but there's the pressure that you have to accomplish certain things in certain times. And as bivocational, when you have a family, you have a church that you leading, and you have a job, it becomes stressful. How do you navigate through all that?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple of things I would say. First off, I think so there's 3 or 4 things here I would say. The first is, start way back, is I think we just have to be reminded, don't bifurcate your work and your mission or ministry, but see that, I talk to church planters, they'll say things like this. They'll say, man, I feel guilty when I'm at work because I can't focus on the church. It's like, no, wait, let's deal with that first. Work is good. We've been created for work. Don't think that, well, when you're at work, you're short changing the church. It's like, no, work is good. And let's start to see, how does your work fit into the mission of God? How does your work contribute to and participate in God's mission? And then how can we begin to align on some level your work and mission and ministry? So I would start there. The second thing I would say is we have to have realistic expectations. We need to have realistic expectations on ourselves, but also there needs to be realistic expectations from the body, from the church, that
Right.
they have to understand that if you're working 20, 30, 40 hours a week in the marketplace, that it's their duty, their responsibility to play a part that's just as important as your part. So there has to be almost like a re-education on the body of Christ. You know, again,
Yeah.
we need to blow up the sacred secular divide, and we need to blow up the clergy laity divide. And then also I would make sure, you know, whatever kind of supervisor or people that you work with, that they understand that. They understand that we can't have the same expectations for a fully funded church planter and somebody that's working 30 hours a week in the marketplace. We have to have a much longer runway kind of perspective. And then the third or the fourth thing that I would say is I think we actually need to create new scorecards. We need to create new measurables. So again, in that Rethink ebook, the very last little chapter or lesson is on this. It's on rethinking scorecards, that we have to measure different things. We have to count and measure different things. It can't just be about how many people show up on Sunday morning. But and in that little lesson, I give lots and lots of suggestions of different things that we should count and measure. But most of them have to do with missionary behaviors and activities. So we need to count the things that we're doing, not just how many people are showing up or how much money they give.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
I have a question, Brother Brad. This expectation of people having seminary degree and all those things, those credentials, you know, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Sometimes people are seen as a second class
Right.
minister or pastor or church planter or missionary, whatever, if they don't have those credentials, which I don't see in the Bible, but just what is your...
Well, I think, again, so there's a couple things. I mean, I don't know what we do with the expectations except just to try to address them and help them understand, again, kind of blowing up the sacred secular and clergy laity divide and helping them see that this is, you know, it's about the whole body. And I actually think the APES conversation can help there. So I would probably start to help inform people around the giftings of Ephesians chapter 4. But then the other thing I think we have to recognize is that eventually, if not already, this whole bivocational, co-vocational conversation, one of the implications is we're going to have to rethink theological education. That it's just not realistic to ask a church planter to uproot their family and move, 4 states away and go to seminary for 4 years and incur debt of who knows how much money, and then somehow think they're going to go to a church that's going to pay them enough to pay off that debt. For me, it just doesn't make sense. So if someone's really co-vocational and they have a full-time thing in the calling in the marketplace, we're going to have to rethink how we provide theological education. And Scott and I, we talked about this on another call. I think the best, and again, I'm not down on seminary, but I think eventually the best way to provide theological education is going to be in the local church. We have to provide theological education in the local church. And in many cases, it can be connected with one of our Bible colleges or seminaries. And I think you guys do that in your association, that you have that. And the good thing is all of our seminaries now have at least one degree that's 100% online. So I just think we need to connect those online theological, degrees into the local church so people can get theological education there. Now, I know that still doesn't fully address the expectations that some people have. It's like, oh, you have to, I'm not going to respect you until you, I just think over time that we're just going to have to change that. I mean, but I think one of the things we can do is provide some alternative ways of kind of being credentialed, I guess, to go back to the question, the word that you used. And I think that's going to have to happen on a more local, regional, and Baptist Association is one of the best places to do that. I mean, we have kind of the framework for that, right? There can be some credentialing sort of things come from the local association.
So I have one more question. So I see here a lot of bivocational pastors. So one of the concerns that I have is, and maybe you can address this, is let's talk about the layman. Let's talk about those people who are supposed to be co-shepherding. Is there anything available out there for laymen, those who are deacons, those who are, they they're not called to the ministry in that sense of the word, but they are laymen who participate quite a bit in the church leadership. And the reason I'm asking about that is because they are the ones that have the tendency of trying to tell the pastor what to do when they have no idea what's going on. And so is there any resources available where it's like let's look at it from the outside to the inside of the shepherding ministry? What's going on with that shepherd or that pastor? Why does he think that way? What do you follow what I'm?
Oh no, I hear you, and I wish I had a good suggestion. I just don't. I mean, and maybe someone else on the call.
Maybe Scott or Brother Bob or
again. I do think though, as a preliminary, before you kind of get to the specific of what you brought up, I do think the whole APES conversation helps there, because it helps people see kind of their lane in a sense of how God's wired and gifted them. And then what it can do is, like, if you are wired more as a shepherd, then that passage says, how are you going to equip other shepherds? So I do think that can be kind of a preliminary conversation, but specifically, a resource of how you just kind of framed it there. I don't have a good suggestion for you.
Perhaps, Brad, kind of backing up a little bit, broadening it a little bit, and maybe you could just kind of introduce us to the missional conversation. I mean, I think there's still some confusion about what that word actually means, and thinking of ourselves, regardless of clergy or laity, quote unquote.
Yeah. Well, and I almost said
missionaries.
that. Yeah, I almost said that too. I do think that's another kind of preliminary first step, is helping people. So you'll see in that video that the breakout thing that I did on Thursday, about the first 20 minutes is really all on recapturing the missionary nature of the church. And whenever I talk about the missionary nature of the church, I think there's two paradigm shifts that have to happen. One is there's a paradigm shift that we have individually, that we begin to understand we are a sent missionary person. That a missionary isn't just someone we send to foreign lands or faraway places, but I'm actually a missionary. If God is a missionary God, then we as his people are missionary people individually. But then there's a second paradigm shift of rethinking the church, that the church isn't just a place where certain things happen, or the church isn't just a vendor of religious goods and services, but the church is actually a called and sent missionary entity. So I think, two things I would say here, that is an enormous conversation for me. Well, the very first little chapter or lesson in the Rethink ebook is on that. But then also the first probably 20 minutes of this video link that I put in from the breakout on Thursday is on that as well. So I just think whenever I work with an existing church, and an existing church that really wants to try to get people inside the church, outside the church walls, and engage in mission more, I always start with that topic, that we have to recapture what I would call the missionary nature of God and the missionary nature of the church. And I do think, to Scott's point, is that's a really good first step for a lot of people in the church that have just kind of come to consume. It's just like, oh, the church exists for me, and I'm coming because I like the preaching, or they have a good children's ministry, or whatever it might be. I think the first baby step for them is to help them rethink church, because I think we've gotten off track on the true nature and essence of the church, that we think the church is there to create religious consumable goods and resources for me to come and consume of. And that's a very poor, misguided way to understand the church. So I think that it's just a huge foundational paradigm shift, and we have to start there. And then, for me, in many cases, that kind of lays the foundation for rethinking all these other things. So if that
begin, go ahead, Brad.
Well, I was just gonna say, if that interests you at all, just watch the first 20 minutes of that video, or download the Rethink ebook, and you'll see, I think it's just the first chapter after the introduction. That little chapter there is on that topic.
I'm going to call on Chelsea here in just a minute to talk about the Missional Essentials cohort study that we're going to do in just a minute. But that idea of every church member seeing themselves not as a worship attender, but as a missionary, somebody who's supposed to be active in what they do, and then APEST kind of helping refine that a little bit
Right.
about what exactly is it that God's called us to. There's a great, we may have time for another question in just a minute to give you a heads up, but Chelsea Horde on DBA staff is helping us go through a great book by Brad called Missional Essentials. Chelsea?
Yes, so in July, we're going to offer the opportunity to go through this book called Missional Essentials, which Brother Brad co-authored that. And some of the things he's talking about, especially just a few minutes ago with the missionary nature of the church and the sacred secular split and things, are discussed very practically in this book. It's going to give you some really practical ways to help kind of transform your own personal practices, but also the way you engage with the community. It's very accessible, so if you have church members or church leaders that you may want to get them to take this kind of first step in understanding what the role of the church is, this is an excellent opportunity, and you can send them our way as well. So it's not just reserved for pastors or church staff, but anyone that you have that might want to go through this. We actually use this material every year in our Life Changer Summer Internship Program. And I can tell you every year, year after year, the people that go through this book come back and just talk about the ways and just how impactful this book has been in the way they continue to do ministry and in the way they lead their own personal lives and family. And so this will be a neat opportunity if you want to sign up for that, or if you want to send this to any of your church members or anybody else you have relationships with. You can register at dba.net/missional essentials. And so that will give us your contact information, and we'll get the book to you, and we will begin walking through that together and kind of discussing those ideas and how to apply them to your own personal ministry situations in July. So we'd love to have you be a part of that.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chelsea. The whole idea of each church member being a missionary and not just necessarily being the one who does the coffee on Sunday morning, but that God has called them to some job, some mission outside the church is just really empowering. And you may find that folks light up to that who may not light up to being on a committee and such. And so just giving them the freedom to think along some of these lines has been very exciting and very empowering for a lot of folks. Brother Larry, I see you have you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. And thank you all for doing this conference today. And Brad, like some others, I serve in an older community, a smaller church, about 16 to 20 people. They don't want to see their church die, but we don't have any children. So we know we need to do some outreach. And what you all have been talking about just the last few minutes, especially, has sort of dovetailed into that. I'm wondering, I know your emphasis is primarily about starting new work, but aren't there some strategies that you use in starting new work that would be just as applicable to older established churches like ours to revive our church and to help us start moving forward again?
Yeah, Larry, that's a great question. You know, so again, I just keep going back to it, but I think go download the Rethink ebook, and I think the first 3 lessons might give some people in your congregation just a little different perspective or framework to start first by helping them see they are a sent missionary person. And then so that's kind of the first lesson, rethinking the church. The second is what I call Incarnational Mission. And what I mean by that is that instead of trying to do some kind of like outreach in the church to try to get people to come to, that we need to realize that God has already sent us where we live, work, and play. God's already sent us in our neighborhood, in a workplace, or some kind of social space that we hang out during the week. I don't care if it's a grocery store or the library or a cafe or a coffee shop. And then the third one, so we realize we have to actually like embed our lives in that little setting, wherever God sent me. And then the third one is, I just say it's about discovery and discernment. And this is where I find this to be encouraging for smaller churches, especially churches that think they don't want to die. Here's what I tell them all the time: is this conversation about the missional church, the conversation about us being a sent missionary people and embedding our lives in the gospel into local context. Here's why it's usually helpful or encouraging for smaller churches. is they begin to realize they don't need to compete, and they shouldn't anyway, but they don't need to compete against the bigger church down the street. What they need to do is discover what is God already doing in their community, and then secondly, discern how is he gifted and wired. I don't care if there's 15 people. What are the gifts and resources God's given those 15 people? And then discern, how do you connect what God's doing in the community with the gifts he's given that church? Does that make sense? So I tell you, really, it's old Henry Blackaby stuff, right? I mean, but I like to use the language of discover and discern. So the first question is, what is God doing? And the second, so that's the discovery. The second question is, in light of our gifts and resources, how does God want us to participate? That's the discerning. So even a small church of 10 or 15 or 20 people, there's certain gifts and resources God's given those people, without a doubt. So we have to discern, how do we connect the resources and the giftings God given us to what he's already doing in the lives of the people around us. So you don't have to try to start a youth ministry when you don't have any youth, or a children's ministry, because you could say, look, we don't have those gifts and resources. We don't have any kids, or we don't have anyone to lead kids. So, but you have been given some gifts and resources of some sort. And how can you, like, are there retired accountants, or are there people that are chefs or great cooks, or, what are the needs in that community? And then connect the gifts and resources you have with those needs, and then figure out, okay, we have 6 retired school teachers. All right, well, that's obviously an enormous resource that we have. So how can we connect the resources of these school teachers we have in our church to the needs of the kids in the school down the street? I mean, and that's not an easy process. I mean, discernment's difficult. I think discovery can be fairly easy, but it's the discernment of how do we connect the resources we have with what God's already doing. So I just think, as simple as that sounds, I just think for most churches, that's where we need to start. We need to identify, do an audit. What are the gifts and resources you have as a church? And then do a discovery process of what are the needs in our neighborhoods where we live, or the community where the church building is. And then to say, okay, how can we begin to connect our resources with those needs?
Great. Well, thanks, Brad. Man, we could talk about this stuff for a long time. Each one of these is a book. And so thanks so much. Jana Jackson, do you mind if I call on you in just a minute to close us with prayer? And then you guys do see some stuff in the chat. James, you want to tell us how we can save our chats?
Yes, there's 3 little dots in the bottom right-hand corner on the right side of your screen. If you click on that, it does say save chat, but we will also be sending all of the stuff that's in the chat. We'll email it to anybody who registered for this today. So if you don't want to mess with it, then we'll send out a document that has clickable links in it for you. When you download it, it downloads as a text file, so the links aren't clickable. And so you have to do a couple things to make them clickable for you. So if you are patient, we'll send it to you. If you're very impatient, then go for it, and good luck. And then we'll give you a clickable one here in a day or two.
Great.
And Scott, just one thing, if you want to mention that this dialogue about different topic is going to continue maybe once a month, and I think will be good for everybody to know a little bit.
Right. Yeah. And so we want to continue this format of a discussion. Sometimes there is a good time for a presentation, a teaching, but what we would like to do this, at least on a monthly basis, is kind of a dialogue like this. And so, Brad, thank you so much for kind of modeling our first one like this. We may play in with the name of Table Talk. It was an idea that Luther had a long time ago to talk about theology and such around a table. And so the idea of a conversation among folks who are all headed the same direction towards growing more like Christ, more in his ministry. So do be looking for future ones like this. Bob, anything else you want to mention?
No, just how much we appreciate you, Brad, and the things you're adding to the conversation as we're trying to be on mission with God. And just wanted to thank everyone who came today. It's been a great meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Great. Any final words, Brad? Or
No, I enjoy the conversation, and hopefully maybe we can do it face to face. I actually, and I'll email Bob, you and Scott both, but I think, and I don't know if it's too early, I think I may be in Dallas in late July. So I don't know if it's too early to gather people together, but I'll send you an email whenever I know for sure if that's going to work out or not.
Yeah, we'd love to see that happen. We'll just keep you 6 feet away.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right, Jana, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And do look for an email on Monday with kind of follow-up to all of this.
Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for my brothers and sisters in Christ who are on this call. I thank you for the way you have uniquely gifted them. I thank you for the love that they have for their churches and for their community. And Father, we're all seeking to walk in your way, to walk in your path that you make straight for us. And so we just acknowledge that and say that to you and tell you that we want to follow what you have for us. I ask that you give these pastors and church leaders strength for each moment, that you give them guidance, that you help them to embrace your love and your care for them, and that you also give them ways to increase understanding among their membership and people they come in contact with about how we all are serving together as missionaries for a missionary God. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
All right.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Bye.
See you next time.